Lofink opens here with a look at the way that the priestly writers, or P for short, adapted the Enuma Elish, like we talked about in the earlier modules. One of the points he makes is that God hangs the sun and the moon in the sky like mere utensils, right? These aren't gods anymore. They are just decorations, so to speak. I mean, our tools, right? Like you might hang a lantern or something by your tent when you're camping, right? He calls this a demythologization so radical that we can scarcely appreciate it now, right? I mean, we just kind of read it, yeah, and then you have the moon and the sun. But for the people of that time, this would have been like, what? Like, no, the sun is a god, right? The moon is a god themselves. You don't just hang them someplace, right? They are born out of other gods, or they have to fight some monster or something, you know. They are the power. Nope, not in this story. In this story, it was, you know, a tool of God, you know, so to speak. When God parts the waters to create the world, there's no fight. It's not a chaos. The waters of chaos aren't a monster. They're not a divinity. They're just waters, and He parts them and creates the world with no struggle. So again, we see here that God has a dominion over, right, the other gods, which we'll see, which we saw, you know, are not just expressions of the forces of nature or human desires. Those things are not divine. Right? God alone, the holy other, is. Here's one: God works, then rests. That didn't happen in the Enuma Elish. In the Enuma Elish, the Mesopotamian gods didn't work at all. Right? Well, they did it one time, they didn't like it. So then they made these lesser gods to do the work for them, taking care of the earth, producing yummy foods and stuff. But they didn't like it either, and they rebelled. They revolted against the higher gods, and so then they made humans. These are good slaves, right? And so that's the way, you know, people were programmed to think about themselves in the Mesopotamian culture. That's the way it worked in Egypt too, right? The Pharaoh was a god. You weren't, and so you worked and he didn't, right? So this idea where God rests and then humans rest with him, this is, as Lofing puts it, critical of the whole ancient world, in which leisure was for the free and work was for the women and slaves, right? So this is different. This is no, everybody works and everybody rests. Right? So in this, he proposes a new society in which creative work and divine rest alternate for everybody. Right? Again, when we look at the history of the Israelites, we can see how God revealed this to them. Right? This is what Lofink was talking about in the first section of this chapter. As God separated them, as God liberated them from these oppressive cultures, right? They could see this better vision of God. You know, I once had a student, and I have to admit, like, it didn't seem like he was paying attention much all the time, and you know, sometimes teaching gets a little frustrating. And I have to admit, I was just kind of frustrated, and I was just like, oh, this guy's not paying attention again. And I said, oh, you know, Joey, what? You want to tell me, you know, about what archaeology has to tell us? And I'm a little embarrassed, but, you know, I was frustrated. And you want to tell us what archaeology has to tell us about the story of how the Israelites came to power in the Promised Land? And he looked at me for a few seconds, and he looked kind of shocked that he was being called upon in class. And he said, "Slaves take over." And it was, you know, it was beautiful. It was just one of the most wonderful moments in my professional career. I was embarrassed and proud at the same time, right? Because the kid nailed it. You know, in 3 words, he hit the Israelite experience. slaves take over. When the slaves and peasants and other fringe groups kind of took over Israel, when they first went out and lived in a pioneer, and then eventually formed a confederacy and controlled the area to some extent, they didn't become the new kings, you see, right? They weren't like, oh, we took over, now we're going to be the kings who rest and everybody else works. No, they had a new vision of God and a new vision of society, one in which everyone works and everyone rests, right? Everyone has a relationship with the divine, right? Not just the guy in charge. So if we move on to the end of the first creation story, it's kind of wrapped up with this phrase: these are the generations or births of the heaven and the earth while they were created. Now this has been translated in various ways, like this is the story of creation. But what the word actually means, dot in Hebrew, is generations, and it is a way that the authors of Genesis 1 in the beginning of 2, the first creation story, they really preserve that from the Enuma Elish. So they use the Enuma Elish framework for the story. They don't change that word. That's the same word that the Enuma Elish use when it describes the creation of the heavens and the earth. But in the Enuma Elish, it makes sense because it's a sky god and an earth goddess procreating, right? So the generation is actually like born, right? Just like animals and humans procreate today. But in the Genesis story, it's not like that. There's not a union of the earth and sky goddess, but the word is preserved, right? And you see God, through God's word, these things are generated, are born, right? Now, what this shows is the generative power of the earth. The earth is creating these things as commanded by God. So God is creating indirectly here, right? Like he says, let the earth bring forth vegetation, right? He doesn't say, oh, I create out of nothing an oak tree. I create out of nothing an amoeba. I create out of nothing sorry, I guess amoeba is an animal, right? So we're still on plants here. But again, the same thing happens for animals, right? Let the earth bring forth living creatures, right? The same thing happens. So he doesn't say, I'm going to create out of nothing a sea slug, right? No, the earth does it, right? It does it at his commands, but as Lofink points out, did P sense that God had placed within the creation itself the power to develop and bring forth life. You see where he's going with this, right? He's going to evolution, right? Did God create the world indirectly through something like evolution? And did P get this already? Yeah. These things, again, nature's not God. It's not the sky and the earth having children through typical procreative functions, right? No, what is it? It's the creation itself having the power to develop and bring forth life as directed by God. It fits very well with a theistic theory of evolution. Okay, so this Tola dot is not just used for the creation of the animals and the plants. It's also used for humans, right? From Adam all the way to Abraham and Jacob / Israel. So this is when the Bible puts these begats and these genealogies that link the various groups that it tells stories about together in Genesis. They use that same word, toledot. Now, what's the point? Well, Lofink says that history, it's trying to show you that history is not something that's added to creation, as if you have this creation and then on top of it you have a human history. No, the creation is from the beginning also designed by God so that it will unfold itself in history. So the human history is part of the evolutionary process through which God creates the earth. Right? And you see this in the motif of blessing. Be fruitful and multiply. Right? This is what God tells the human beings after he creates them in the first Genesis story. It's what he tells them again after the flood in chapter 9 of Genesis. And it's fulfilled in Exodus when we see the Israelites being very fruitful and multiplying beyond the containment capacities of the Egyptians, right? And so Lofink describes this as the unfolding of what God had placed within creation already in the course of the 6 days of God's created work. So God's creating the world in such a way so that it will unfold in the history of the Israelites being fruitful and multiplying. So Lofink is making the point here that creation becomes history, right? Creation unfolds in such a way that it expresses that it is being expressed in and through human history, right? But it also works the other way. History becomes creation, right? And points out Isaiah in chapter 40 to 55. He sees history as creation. He says, making the point, when God leads the Israelites out of Babylon, out of the Babylonian exile, back into Zion, God will be creating something utterly new and unheard of. Right? So through human history, that's part of the process of growth and development that is part and parcel of the whole evolution of creation. You see what he's saying here? All right. And for us, this really opens up. I mean, I don't know if previous times in history, people probably didn't think that there was 12 billion years of process going on, right? They didn't think about, like, wow, this is for us to get to here, right? And move onwards. There's really been a lot that has gone on. Right, so he brings up the question,